We're now live, everyone, so over to you, Kelly.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. We would like to thank everyone that has been watching all of our presentations and sent in the questions for the panel. I'd also like to thank the panel for joining us today. Today we have joining us, James Walker from Sigmat. We have Jeff Pelger from MyDeck, Lee Wilmershurst from Steelbuild, and Phil Chitty from Sapphire Balconies, David Jones from the Institute of Construction Management, and we have Nick Horton from Sapphire Balconies as well. We do have apologies sent by Lawrence Macbeth from Alumet. Unfortunately, he wasn't able to join us today. But if you do have any questions for him, then I will send them on to him and we can always get back to you. Like I say, thank you everyone for joining us. I'd now like to start with the first of our questions. We have had some questions sent in to us from our from those who've been viewing over the last couple of days. Our first question would be to James. At what stage of planning would you say architects should consult companies like yourselves? Oops.
I think we're hearing you, James.
Sorry, James, we can't quite hear you there. Oh, no.
Perhaps we should move on to the next question and come back in a second, Kelly.
Yeah, we could do that. So I'll just move on to the next one while James sorts it out. This would be for Jeff. Rapid access sounds really interesting. How has it been working and has it been affected during the COVID-19 restrictions?
That's a good question. Thank you. Yes, at the moment we are trialing it on job, and practically speaking, it's working brilliantly. And from a COVID perspective, it's been received very well. From the perspective of not having to enter the residents' premises or actually being able to do everything from the outside. So yeah, I would say from that perspective, it's been fantastic.
Thank you. And I've got one here for Lee. Do you feel the changes that have been made will become the new normal on site?
I'm not sure they'll become the new normal. I think people will be more aware of pressures with programme, and I think things that we've taken for granted previously, this will definitely have an impact on that. I believe we will return to some sort of normal as we knew it previously at some point. Where that is, I'm not sure.
I'd like to ask that question out to the panel. Does anyone else find in their areas of work that the things that they've had to change will now become, the more normal for them?
I'm sure James would probably find similar to ourselves in the fact that the benefits we've been talking about for years in terms of manufacturing off-site, reducing labour and so on, have always been a benefit from a cost point of view and from speed and so on. But with people now being more reliant on labour and the delays on site and so on, and having to put measures in place which are ultimately necessary but are slowing things down, I think probably MMC is getting a boost which was perhaps coming in the future, but it's perhaps been accelerated. I don't know, James, if you're finding the same, and if you are able to speak here.
You can hear me?
Yes, you can, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we found that, again, previous jobs, being able to have minimal number of men on site is a benefit. It's helped with certainly the social distancing in the welfare facilities and things like that. And it's probably hastened people's decisions to move to that modern method of construction. Again, we've got better control of the health and safety and social distancing in the factory than you have out on a live site where you've got lots of different trades intermingling with one another.
Did anyone else want to add anything before I move on to the next question?
Yeah, if I could just add one thing. I mean, certainly in Sapphire's experience, we have seen clients change program where they've gone for trades that can genuinely separate and stay apart on site. That has made a difference. There are some trades where this just isn't possible. We've seen restrictions on areas on site, but I think this is going to become the new norm. The fact that when you walk onto a site, your temperature will be taken. You will be having a significantly longer induction, which will cover an awful lot more health issues as well as safety. Health is very much seen as a poor brother to safety. We do 95% safety and 5% health within health and safety, and this has always been a very, very poor balance. So if nothing else, what COVID has pushed is a much harder drive on the health side of health and safety.
Great, thank you, Phil. It kind of leads me on to a question that has been asked to yourself. Could you give us any advice on the track and trace app? Can we use in offices? Now, I know that you've implemented it at Sapphire, so could you give anyone advice that are thinking of maybe having that QR code kind of system up and running at their workplace?
Yes, certainly. It was actually very, very easy to set up. I have 2 Android phones. I have it now on one of those. It only took a couple of seconds to set. As far as registering our Reading offices, again, was very, very simple. Just go onto the NHS website and follow the path through. We have now got the QR code set up in 2 places on our building, so that if we get any delivery drivers who need to access the building, they can zap. And also if we get any members of staff or visitors coming into the building. We are obviously on a minimal staff inside our building. We've got a lot of staff that can work from home, but we're also encouraging them to have the app on their phones so that the track and trace system knows where they've been. There are genuine benefits to using it. I can't see any sort of valueless points in it at the moment. The fact that you have something that can tell you what the risk is to you while you are there, the risk to your families as well, or to your work colleagues, has got to be beneficial. So certainly a very, very simple system. It relies on the honesty of the user. If the users around the country can keep it up to date, then the database only gets bigger and the thing gets a lot more accurate.
Thank you very much, Phil. Yes, I've actually downloaded it myself, and like you say, it's really, really easy to use. So definitely recommend it.
I'd be quite keen, if Kelly, if you don't mind me jumping in there.
Yeah.
Lee, are you finding this sort of thing becoming more and more common with your people which are actually on sites and so on? Are you finding more sites are putting this into play now, or what's your take generally for the industry adopting that sort of thing?
Like yourselves at Sapphire, we've adopted this QR system, but I haven't had decent feedback from sites at this stage, whether it's working or not working. But one thing we've taken as a company is that we've had a track and trace internal system since day one, and we've decided we're going to continue with this because I don't think anyone should let up their guard because there's an app in place, because it is going through the testing process. We should all help the country track and trace each other. But at the same time, I don't think we should take our foot off the gas of any measures we've currently got in place as well.
That's a really good point. Obviously, we all have our own responsibilities, and it's great to know that other companies are, taking things seriously, like you say. Thanks for the feedback on that one. I do have a question for David. In your interview, you did mention the new safety regulator role. How do you feel that will affect the construction industry?
Thank
There
you.
you go.
Yeah, thank you. Such a brilliant question. My first answer to that is hopefully dramatically. We've got to do it. It's got to work. Dame Judith has actually said before it even comes in, do it now. I said it before, didn't I? You know how to do it. You know what to do. Do it. It's not rocket science. So there's going to be lots of changes. The main drive behind golden thread, we keep hearing about this golden thread. Again, that's not rocket science. It's just linking it all together. But it's to retain this clear, current, accessible record of information relevant to the high-rise, high-risk, high-rise residential buildings, that primarily. But, you know, eventually we've got to engender this golden thread through the whole of what we do. And that's what's got to happen. And that question is great. So hopefully dramatically, and hopefully it's going to be part of my ongoing journey for this. So we've got to make it work. So, you know, we've got to support Dame Judith. We've got to support the industry. We've got to support Sapphire. Sapphire's got to support its own balconies on the buildings, and people have got to feel safe standing on your balconies. They've got to trust you, you know, they've got to trust the industry, and they do, because you've got terrific products. I know. Look around some of the prestigious developments in London. Greenwich is very near, Greenwich Peninsula. Seen a lot of your stuff hanging on the buildings there, and it looks great. So, you know, you're one of these organizations doing it right, but we've got to get the whole lot into this. So yeah, that's my, is hopefully dramatically it is going to revolutionize and transform. Yeah, we're a new normal. Let's make it a good start.
That's great, thank you, David. It kind of leads, there was another question you just mentioned, really, the golden thread there. Someone has actually asked, you know, can you explain a bit more about how the golden thread actually works?
Yeah, well, yeah, we're starting to sort of put it all together. Basically, we're in the digital world. We're moving into the digital world. You know, I mentioned during my presentation that I've just joined the Local Enterprise Partnership for the Southeast, and I'm co-chair of the Digital Skills Partnership. So that's all part of it. So in essence, the golden thread has got 4 key information products, and that is a digital record, a fire and emergency plan, full plans, and a construction control plan. Now, we've already got health and safety plans that come out of CDM and all of this. And a lot of this information will already hopefully be in the health and safety plans, a file rather. But how often do we open the health, or we ask for the health and safety file if one exists? Thankfully, some do. When you open them, you find somebody's put in there, this section still to be completed. This section requires information from the M&E. This section requires, etc., etc. This certificate or the BBA certificate is missing. Look for it on the supplier's data and all this. So you've got incomplete information. The golden thread isn't there. So hopefully all of these 4 parts will come together. You know, the fire and emergency file goes over and above the requirements of a health and safety file, because what the new regulator body is health and safety, building control, fire. All of those 3 pillars have got to come together. Now, interestingly, the new kid on the block is going to be this super, what I call the super CDM expert. He's got to have all of those competencies for those 3 pillars. It's an incredible remit. But not only that, that CDM, we call it CDM, that is the building safety manager, has got to actually deal with the users, because that's what Dame Judith found in her investigation, that the user isn't being considered. Look at Grenfell. You know, I first approached Grenfell and came in Grenfell when the users were blogging 3 years before the fire, and it was Eddie Defan actually said those resounding words, and they're within me now in my psyche. He said, what's got to happen? 3 years prior to the fire, he wrote to the TMO an email and said, what's got to happen? Has this building got to be burning down before you people listen to us? So, you know, the new building safety manager has actually got to know the buildings that they're assigned to actually manage properly. But I don't know, worse than that, better than that. What about when all the users are actually feeding information and their concerns to the building safety manager? It's not happened yet, but you know, how is that going to happen? It's going to be an overload of information. Hopefully the building safety managers will be able to competently handle that, because if they got sort of 100 flat people and they've all got problems with their front entrance doors, flat doors, which they did. Do you remember the 1,000 defective fire doors around that were found? Those users might well describe the problems that they're having with the fire doors in very different ways. They might say the yellow strip round the door, meaning the intermittent. Somebody might talk about smoke seals. Another might talk about this and that isn't fitting or has dropped off, or a bit of whatever. So somehow all of that has got to be brought together into this digital world to actually get the right information to the right person at the right time, setting up ticket systems. We're not there yet. And some of the work that I'm doing will have to bring in artificial intelligence. And I'm working with colleagues at Greenwich University on early scoping of this. How do we do it? A graphic user interface for the users so they can get to the building safety manager and that he's not overloaded with 10 weeks of information before he actually finds an urgent thing that he needed to deal with 9 weeks ago. It's that sort of situation. It's a big remit. We can only do it, I think, with algorithms, artificial intelligence. And of course, don't forget, in the high-rise buildings, users could be multi-language as well. So that artificial intelligence has got to understand the various languages and the cultures and the way things are described. So it's a big remit, you know. There's a lot of work to do. Again, it's my journey. Thanks. I could spend all day, but there we are.
Yeah, well, thank you very much for that. It's very interesting. James, I'll probably come back to your question if that's okay. No, we can hear you. So what stage of planning would you say architects should consult yourselves?
As I was saying when you couldn't hear me, hopefully you can hear me now. The earlier the better, and it dovetails nicely into what David was just saying. It's that end-to-end process, because it's not just, it's that from that conceptual idea of what that building is to it actually being torn down at the end of its life. Because obviously, in terms of going with modern methods of construction, the build methodology and the way the building goes together is very different to a traditional concrete frame or steel frame. So you've got to have that reliance on the building manager, the O&M manuals being used properly. We're creating structural walls in flats that someone might just decide, oh, I want to knock something down and put a new kitchen in, and they need to understand what can and can't do. And as I was very succinctly into what David was saying about people understanding what the building that they live in, and reliance on somebody to actually tell them, yes, they can do that, or no, they can't, or actually help them alleviate any defects that they might come across. So the earlier, the better. And it's moving in a different way of building. I see it when you engage in the whole industry needs to, and move away from not that D&B is evil, but it has some evil tendencies in that it all comes down to the bottom line and value engineering, and I can get rid of that, or I can go with a lesser product. Sometimes you need to stand up and be counted, and it's got to cost that, because that's the right solution for the right project for the right building.
That's great. Thank you very much, James.
It's interesting what both of you there have alluded to, and one of the things which we're looking at is an industry we've sort of shifted the conversation, if you like, almost out of construction into the kind of the occupation of buildings and so on. And I know obviously, Jeff, you're quite involved in that end of things, but ultimately one of the things which we've all been noticing probably from the Grenfell inquiry and so on is the way that there isn't joined up thinking, or hasn't been joined up thinking in decision making, and how one aspirational value can have a massive impact on other areas. And what I think we're all kind of hoping for in the future of construction, and what does seem more likely and is probably well facilitated by the likes of modern methods of construction, offsite manufacturing and so on, is more joined up thinking in terms of understanding consequences one thing has on the next, and the next, and the next, and looking at the thing from building a better building and then building the process better during that process. Is I'm thinking in particular, I guess, kind of the likes of once you've built once you've worked out the process and the values and the different things we need to choose from a product's point of view, it's then working back and actually saying, well, how can we make sure that we are delivering in line with the golden thread and all the other recommendations which are coming out of the Hacker report and so on. And as you say, David, that involves collaboration, the digital, embracing MMC, and that sharing of information. It's quite fundamental, isn't it?
Did anyone want to add to that? Sorry, before I move on.
It's actually, yeah, if you don't mind. One of the things I've certainly picked up from David and from James in the last couple of minutes really is CDM as a piece of legislation obviously has been around since 1995. There have been various polls of architects since then, including one that I remember came out in 2004 that actually showed that only 27% of architects had even heard of it 9 years after it came out. There's an awful lot of concentration within the CDM regulations, or certainly put on there by developers, to concentrate all of their CDM works around the build phase. CDM is about more than building buildings. It has to be about clear strategies for ongoing maintenance, clear strategies for ongoing cleaning of buildings. You know, gone are the days when we know we can put a lamp up in a building and we can never change the light bulb without getting £1,000 worth of scaffolding in. I think we're past that stage now. But as Grenfell has shown, we're not past the stage where we genuinely look at building refurbishment as something that has an ongoing safety risk, not only for the residents, but also for those that have actually got to fit that stuff in the first place. So very, very much solid O&Ms and a good strategy for ongoing maintenance have got to be as much part of the build of a building as the pre and post construction safety plans. Very, very much can't agree with what David was saying more.
Thank you, Phil. Okay.
Or we're highlighting individual components of any build, but from my experience, it doesn't matter how well something's designed or ended, that every process needs to be checked through quality and different procedures, because the best design in the world installed incorrectly will be a poor design. The incorrect design installed well will still be a poor design, and so on and so on. So I think the industry's seen over definitely the last couple of years a massive hike in quality and traceability, and I think that's so important for whatever trade, however big or however small, because I don't believe I've met many people in construction that set out to hurt anyone. I believe the incorrect person makes the incorrect decision, which then has an impact that they're not aware of. So I believe when we're putting operatives to work or staff to work, it's about competence and making sure that this strategy is followed from start to finish with no gaps in it, because that's where you start to find the exposure of such dangerous occurrences.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. And an additional point that I'd like to highlight is if you differentiate between new buildings being built and designed and a lot of the old buildings that are there already that have issues, I mean, that's just a completely different ball game. And what we're finding is we're getting involved in a lot of solution-orientated discussion with regard to existing buildings with existing issues that have to now be sorted out. And that to me is also one of the biggest challenges that perhaps is not as straightforward, and more the solutions there are more kind of geared towards each different building, and what's been done and what hasn't been done with them. So differentiating between new build and new ways of design, and then fixing the old is quite a different challenge, I find.
Also, with the MMC was talking about, that obviously helps with quality control. So when you've got hundreds of men on a site on a project in lots of varying areas, it's very hard to control that quality. It can be done, it's proven to be done, but when you've got a product that's in a factory environment and it's in a lean process, it's very easy to control those processes. So I think that's where modern day technology lends itself well to quality, which obviously supports my previous comment.
I think you're right there as well in terms of the skill base. The site labour skill base is something that's dwindling in the UK. So the off-site and being able to control it in a controlled environment of a factory or a assembly process plant, again, it adds to that quality. And again, to go back to your earlier point about a bad design put together well is still a bad design, and vice versa. Again, that rattles back to the early engagement of the way you're going to build and deciding on that methodology at the earliest point, so you can give yourself the time to integrate all the elements together, which feeds into, we're now trying to push forward with BIM, which again, fantastic, but it needs everybody to buy into it for it to be successful and breed that success on the project and throughout the life cycle of the building.
Great, thank you. Actually, you mentioned there, James, about potential labour, shortages, like skill shortages kind of thing. I did have a question for Nick. What can SAFA offer that can benefit the industry with potential labour shortages and restrictions on site?
I think this probably goes back to what we were talking about earlier, and what James just alluded to again there, is that really we've been talking about a labour crisis. We've been talking about Brexit and the effects that might have to a pool of labour way before we even started talking about COVID and the pandemic. That only makes things worse. And really, as Lee says, taking stuff off site is much more controlled in a factory. You can get machinery to obviously automate different parts, and the same with the design process. I think that's where directionally, that's certainly where we're finding the biggest benefit is we're investing heavily in technologies which will help that design process and reduce the labour up front. In terms of a difference on feet on the ground, it's the innovation, the speed of the install and so on, and working with partners like Lee, who are very much, we're looking at the way we can install things more in a clever way, basically, rather than rushing and doing it. It's about how we can build that into the design and get a better product built quicker, and reduce the time on site ultimately. Lee, we obviously take a casing point. A few years back, we worked together on a big scheme on the Isle of Dogs, that 46-story tower. But the number of people we had originally talked about at the beginning of the build compared to what was actually being utilised during the build was quite different numbers, weren't they?
Yeah, they were. As you say, it's all about methodology, and I think regardless of whether it's off-site or on-site, I think that methodology is the best way forward. And as you say, a lot of the time it tends itself into a factory environment. But I also feel that as an industry, we can't go away from competence, and I think it's important we continue to bring people into our industry, because regardless of where the skill sets, I think it's important that we drive skill levels as well.
Correct. So de-skilling the process and upskilling the labour together is working for a better end result ultimately, isn't it?
Yeah, that's right.
Sorry, you're muted, Kelly.
Sorry. I have a question here that has come in for David, but I think it's probably open to most of the panel as well. Do you feel that knowledge sharing has been a problem within the construction industry, especially where materials are concerned?
Yeah, that's an incredibly interesting point. Yes, sharing of information about the commercial aspects, because we've got these statutory links, but we've got contractual links. You know, we've been hearing quite a lot for those of us that have been following some of the, hopefully some of the Grenfell. You can see the way that information has been held back, you know, particularly around the sort of the contractor, the supplier, the subcontractors, and the manufacturers around that. That certain information is held back, cost information. There's sensitive stuff there, and certain things get lost that could be vital. You know, I've always really opted throughout my life for almost the Nolan principles. You know, the last few decades I've been in senior management at local authorities, and I've adopted the Nolan principles, the 7 principles of open, honesty, transparency, all of those sort of things. That's basically a lot of how I've got to where I've got now, and why I'm driving you know, the competency agenda, because it has to be open, honest, transparent, so that when information comes, that the right information is there, you know. And there's been a lot of sort of exposure on the wrong information is there. You know, it's not only complex information. When you start looking at approved document B, that's only guidance, you know, and I've had this guidance is only guidance. So a competent person should take that guidance, information flows, and use them competently within their own knowledge, skills, and expertise, and come to their own design decisions. I did that in 1989. I was consultant to various local authorities as an individual. I was a cladding designer, and London Borough of Croydon had 8 high-rise residential blocks, as it happens, in the borough in 1989. And I'm still in touch with the guy. He's retired now, the maintenance manager. He rang me up one day and said, look, we've got these 8 blocks around in New Addington and Monks Hill and the various estates and things like that. He said, they're getting very tired. They're the old, you know, 50s type buildings. He said his exact brief to me wasn't anything about thermal, wasn't anything about fire or anything like that. His exact brief was, can you pretty them up? So I said, yes, of course I can. So I did. And I didn't worry about standards. I knew that whatever I wanted put on that building shouldn't burn, shouldn't make the building any worse. That was the driving sort of principles. Again, as I said, it's not rocket science. So those buildings, I went for the standards weren't there in those days, but what we now call A1, you know, the non-combustible. I went for a non-combustible solution. Now, the fire in the Grenfell fire, the building research establishment went ballistic, looking at all the high-rise buildings quickly around in tranches to do tests. I'm proud to say those 8 buildings were 8 of the dozen. There was only a dozen that passed the BRE test, the first test that said not a problem. So currently, Croydon Council, and I'm pleased to say, because there wasn't the money and the budget at the time to pretty them up, but Croydon Council are now retrofitting sprinklers to those, about a £10 million retro job. But that's the point, you know. I did that job, and I'm very proud of the fact that 8 of the dozen that passed were my buildings in 1989. And that's in that building. In my presentation, I mentioned about the smoke vent and the smart smoke vent that I'm developing. On that. So we're going to be using smart technology like you're doing, Nick, with the Sapphire, embodying technology. We're moving on. So knowledge has got to move on. It's got to be open, honest, transparent, but it's got to be fundamentally sound. You know, people have got to rely on this. They've got to trust on this. So as I say, we're all part of that that whole, and hopefully that whole is going to come together so that it's a big hole, and not, I don't mean a hole to fall in, because the industry, the sector has really plummeted. The race to the bottom, we've heard. Hopefully, please, Grenfell is bottom found. We've got to go up. You know, that's the way. So yeah, it's all about this, and we'll only do that if information is properly shared. You know.
Yes, Dave, I think hopefully with you know, people talking openly, honestly through events like, you know, these and things like that, people sharing their experience and knowledge, hopefully that can happen. So yeah, thank you very much. It's great to hear your story there as well. A great example.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, did anyone else want to add anything before we move on to that one? No? Okay, that's great. So I'm just going to move on to the next one. Phil, how have you found working with the restrictions in place whilst visiting other sites? Because obviously that's something that's quite big at the moment.
It is. It's not actually been too bad. I think the most important thing that we have found is just that regular communication with the client site team just always keeps you in the right place, obviously. Things certainly didn't slow down for Sapphire. We were extremely busy through the first couple of months of lockdown. I think between April, May and June, I think we delivered at least 800 balconies to site in that time, and they all would have been installed. So we've certainly been very, very busy still. We have proved to be a trade that can supply to the client's installer, who can then work in an appropriate way within a COVID environment. Things are changing a little bit now with the new unfortunate rise in the number of COVID cases. We are getting some clients that are starting to bring in additional rules, additional items of PPE to be mandatory on site, like face coverings. We never had that before because everybody was outside and we had a 2-meter rule. But I think it was established quite quickly that having a 2-meter rule on a construction site is quite impractical. So it hasn't slowed us down as a business. It hasn't slowed our manufacturing capability down as well. Our supply chain have fed into what we've tried to achieve very, very well. I back up what Lee was saying earlier. Actually, certainly the processes that we've seen put into place by our suppliers like Steel Build have been very rigid and are all about the safety of the employee. There's nothing really that's come up from our perspective that's genuinely made a huge difference to how we operate.
Thank you. Did anyone else want to add anything in their experiences so far?
Yeah, I think it's important when this all first arose. Everyone took this very seriously, and I think a lot of people still do. But unfortunately, it's human nature to get complacent with everything. It's just human nature. No one can be frowned upon for it. I think we all do it, and I think if we're not careful, we're going to get a bit too relaxed with items, and it could damage our industry. Thankfully for us, our customer base is also take this very seriously, and we're okay. But throughout the industry, I'd like to see that it's kept controlled in the way it is, and it's driven forward.
That's great. Thank you very much for that, Lee. So I'm just going to move on to the next question. Do you feel the construction industry is in a place to help young people and adults gain the skills needed to work in your sectors? Obviously, this is something that's been spoken about with the government. Do you feel that it's something that you're able to do within your areas of expertise and businesses?
Well, for us as Steel Build, it's something we're heavily involved in, and we are actually an accredited training centre. So before all of this happened, our vision is to invest in our industry and to bring youngsters into our industry. There's a big lack of skill or competence or understanding even of people and what they do. So we're driven over years to come to really give back and try and help our industry move forward. So we'd like to think that we're placed to try and help and support what's needed.
Great, thank you. James?
Not accredited in the same way as Lee mentioned, but we are continually bringing in young people and older people and training them on what we do. Sort of a bit of a niche, a little bit different. There isn't it's not like a traditional method of building like concrete or steel where it's widely used in the industry. So people that you do bring in, there's an element of learning, and for the younger people, it's starting from the ground up with them. We bring people in all facets of the business, right from the factory through the engineering, the design and detail, and the site side of things.
Okay. Jeff, do you have any experience with this? Sorry.
Not with younger people, but in terms of training and education, we deal with that daily, and it's I think it links into the uncertainty about what makes a building safe and what makes a building compliant. So we are continuously advising clients on different options related to the products that we provide, but also even broader than that. So I think the issue or the subject of training and education is a massive one that links into this post-COVID environment and as well as this post-Grenfell environment that we're living in, because that's to me the way you create that a new world where people are collaborating correctly and traceability is all there. It's through people understanding the effects of what they're doing.
Nick, from Sapphire's point of view, would you like to add anything?
Yeah, we spend a lot of effort, and I'm sure Phil's itching to jump in on this as well. Training our installers and working with teams, for instance, like Lee's teams, and so on this. Yeah, I'm sure Phil, you'd do a better job of explaining what we do from a Sapphire point of view, but yeah, fairly mirrored to what Jeff was just talking about there as well. And in a post-pandemic world, there's probably a whole education piece for the whole industry really about working together better, and that is likely, as has already been referred to earlier on, about perhaps the way procurement is happening will likely change. But I won't steal your thunder there, Phil.
I think there is one thing that I've certainly have picked up in the last little while. My eldest daughter has just gone back to university for her last year. University is still seen as the natural place for a college leaver to go. It's not natural still for people to be looking at apprenticeships as a viable way forward. Apprenticeships, I still feel certainly within our own education system, are seen as the poor little brother of doing a degree, and until we can actually get around that as an industry and really prove to people that pulling somebody in through an apprenticeship has just as much viability as somebody going off and doing a degree, then we are going to carry on with this skill shortage that we have. With regard to our own training, obviously we do an awful lot of training with our installers. We train up install teams on a reasonably regular basis. We've got 2 install training courses coming up in the next couple of weeks. We spend a reasonable amount of time with our installers teams, getting them to a reasonable standard so that they can not only understand our product, understand how it's built, how it's made, which gives them a greater understanding of how to install. We also go down the route of actually training people how to even lift our product off of the lorry when it gets to site before it's lifted up onto the building. So there is a bit of an end-to-end the way that we do installation training. A lot of it is classroom, a lot of it is very practical. You need to do both sides of it. But as I say, just going back to my first point, we as an industry have got to get to a stage where we're not looking at things like as an apprenticeship as being a poor second to getting a degree. An apprenticeship, a 4-year apprenticeship in engineering, construction, or whatever it's going to be has got to be seen as just as viable, and then we will sort out this skill shortage.
That's great. Thank you very much there.
Can I come in on?
Yeah.
Yeah. Interestingly, the apprenticeship system, T-levels, started this very month in September 2020. It's a totally new way of starting to train. Now, I saw this towards the end of last year when the ESFA, the Employment Skills, Education Skills Funding Authority, were sort of getting round these, going to the T-levels, the trailblazers, and all of this, looking at new ways to actually grow the new talent that we need. So I've got involved in this with the institute, and we are now part of what is called Apprenticeship Intermediary Ambassador Network. So that's the blown title, but we come together currently with COVID online. We've got a conference coming up very shortly. The T-levels were set up before, obviously, COVID. So there's a bit of a problem of getting them going. The government still wants to start them in September. The likelihood is that it's probably going to be in the spring before actually things start moving fully in that. But it's very much a fusion between work and employer. So it's a fusion between an employer that takes on a trainee, but it's not a trainee so much as like the traditional apprenticeship is 80% on the job, 20% bit of classroom learning. This is very much following on from the GCSEs. So it's a 16 to 19 year. It's a 2-year course that they will go through, with very much focused on things like Sapphire would want. It's not a full apprenticeship at that point, but it gives them 35 days of safe job experience, work experience, but a lot of classroom stuff where they can be taught about all the engineering things. It's more getting them ready and risk management and all of these things. So it's very much early days, but I think it's the way forward, and I'm very thrilled about this. And particularly the interesting thing is that part of the process of supporting the young people coming through is that they want an endpoint assessment, and so I believe that the institute that I'm part of is ably set up to support that, to give endpoint and also to give accreditation, to give some sort of professional level that you people in Sapphire can know when these youngsters are coming through with that they know how to risk assess, they know a bit about safety, they know that first step on a construction site and all this sort of stuff. So, we're hopefully in the next year or so, we're going to be starting this with, I'm thinking about a whole new way of qualifying these people with even a post-nominal, so that you actually know what these youngsters, when they come for their jobs, can actually do, so yeah, it is new normal, it's a new start, but we've got to grow the talent, that's what we're doing.
David, I think there's a number of companies, and it sounds like several on this call. I know MyDeck certainly work closely with a school which is educating people to be work ready, if you like. What do you think though, Phil and Dave, what's the role of CITB and the CSCS training accreditations and so on in this upskilling of the workforce generally in the future? I know previously it's very topical at times, especially when the funding comes up, the levy. What's your take on that, Phil, David?
Wow, CSCS cards, always a contentious issue. I get what CITB are pushing with this now, because to actually get a hold of a CSCS card, there is a significant amount of additional training that you have to do. Gone is the route where you can apply for a card, go and do a 50-question test, and then have to do nothing else for 5 years, which, always seemed a bit of a strange idea to me, to go and sit 50 multiple choice questions and that calls you, and then you're safe. Now that it is being pushed as a significantly greater requirement, the unfortunate side of that is that a number of industries have been left behind by the CSCS system. Certainly for us as a balcony manufacturer, the nearest that we can get still is balustrades and staircases, I think, and to get an appropriate CSCS card, we've got to do an NVQ in carpentry. Doesn't really seem to fit our industry. But moving onwards, and I'm certainly keeping in contact with CITB about the CSCS system. There's a lot of consultation going on in the background. We are trying to push that industries do not get left behind. The only way that this is going to happen in the future is for them to genuinely look at every industry on an industry by industry basis. Very, very big ask for them. They appreciate it's got to happen. Difficult one. CSCS always a contentious issue.
Interestingly, we're working with a number of trade bodies that have been left a little bit high and dry with exactly what you were saying about the move to the CSCS situation. These construction-related operations, you know, the CRO card, they're not construction, but they are construction-related operations. One of the big cards that were dealing with that was accepted has now been taken over and gone into the CSCS situation. But of course, what they've done, because CSCS doesn't recognize these, you know, the grandfather rights and things like that, you know, that you've built up the sort of quality of what you do over the years, they've been told that at the expiration, they'll run the current card, but at the expiration of the card that is currently there, they will have to go through all of this jumping through hoops again to get the new card. Now, that was, they were notified in the 1st of January, so that's fact. So I've been talking to a number of these trade bodies. That is there a way that our institute can work with these trade bodies to actually use our competency registry that I launched in 2018, and we're moving forward on that, to actually look at a completely new card, not a rival card for CSCS, but a competency card for all those construction related operations around the construction site, for balcony installers and whatever, rather than having to find something that fits. Why not actually fit something that actually works, you know, into the industry, rather than try and find a best fit that's already there. So in, I think, July, I should have been at the House of Commons. There was going to be a launch of a white paper on this, but one of these, but that's been slightly delayed. So it's very much imminent. I'm waiting for the call to actually support this, so that there is work in the offing at the moment on this, so that possibly a new type of digital identification that carries competence and things like that, a card. We're looking at all of that at the moment. I'm very much in the digital world. I'm having to learn the digital world. It's a complete new science for me as well. You know, my God, I've been 4 or 5 decades as a chartered surveyor up to me wherever in mud and all this sort of stuff. You know, digital, it's all new to me as well, but we've got to do it. We've got to embrace the digital world. So, and new ways, new competencies, new ways of recognizing them. You know, we went through all that business on the CSCS cards, the bogus cards, the ones you could buy on eBay, etc., etc. You know, and they were good all the time. Nobody checked them. You know, the competent guys with the bogus cards that were running around, thousands of them, were good until somebody, and then CSCS said, okay, well, let's have a telephone check facility that we can check these quickly up, and that collapsed. So the digital world is going to drive this, you know, all of that. So yeah, brave new world, new beginning.
Can I add to this? Is that okay?
Yeah.
I've got a bit of knowledge in this because I'm a qualified MVQ assessor. So, and I've set up a training centre. So, with the MVQs, they took a long time to catch up. I don't think they're that far behind right now, because there is a subject within the CSCS card now, which is a specialist industry, and there's a lot of categories that fall under it. Balconies isn't one, and balconies is one that I would like to try and implement going forward, because for me, balconies sit between a structural steel worker, architectural metal worker, and a slinger. So with our own guys, our competence check is we have MVQ slingers and either MVQ architectural metal workers or MVQ structural steel workers. And for us, that completes the trio of competence check. With MVQs, just so we're clear, because I know there's a lot of backlash with people that have been in the industry a long time. An MVQ is an assessment. So if you have been in the industry a long time, it is very easily achieved an MVQ, because MVQ is evidence-based. It's not training. So an MVQ isn't there to train someone, and it's very important that you're not allowed to teach people. So what you should be doing is assessing. So if I come to you and you have been doing this a long time and you can support what you've been doing a long time, it really can be a short process, because the gathering the evidence is the easy bit. So I think a lot of it comes through lack of understanding about what is really required of someone. Unfortunately, as you said, and this is why we actually decided to create our own MVQ centre, there are bogus companies out there claiming funding and doing whatever. It's in every industry, it's in every criteria of life, unfortunately. There's always people out there trying to do this sort of thing. But over the years, I've been a bit pushed back with the CSCS card and the MVQ schemes. But now that I understand what I do to the depth that I understand it, there is some mileage behind it, and it isn't that much of a drama to get yourself up to speed if you've been in the industry a long time. And people shouldn't be scared, because it's not about being any better than you was yesterday. It's just about fulfilling a requirement.
That's great, thank you. I'm going to have to start rounding up now, because we have come towards the end of our session today. I would just like to ask the panel if you had a quick, just a takeaway on anything you've learned through COVID that you will be taking forward into the future. So Nick, did you want to start?
I think really it's about the things we've been talking about as good principles, the implementation of BIM, the modern methods, the many of those different aspects of it. It's not just COVID which is highlighting to us the benefit of actually embracing some of these as a holistic view of it, not just taking one aspect, for instance, speed, and just focusing on that. But I think that's really what the last few months, I say the last few months, because I think that includes what we're learning through the Grenfell inquiry as well. But that's really my key takeaway.
Thank you. Phil?
Yeah, certainly one thing. Humans don't breathe through their chins. Please wear your mask over your face. Seen that far too often in the last little while, and people do breathe through their noses, so make sure it covers that as well. But yeah, on a more practical note, one of the things that we have seen actually is a significant improvement in things like personal hygiene and that sort of stuff on site. Actually, people having to take significant action to stop themselves from getting a contagious disease. And also, it has actually highlighted the risk of contagious disease. It's unfortunate that it's taken a worldwide pandemic to do it, but there are genuine risks out there. I certainly get the reports from government every week to show that there are still some very, very serious diseases out there, and we need to keep ourselves protected from them.
Thank you very much, Phil. James? James, did you want to add one final takeaway?
For me, I mean, obviously being office based and having to work from home has been a bit of a revelation. it could be done. You could be in a meeting in Edinburgh at 9 o'clock on a Monday morning, and by lunchtime in one in London. So it's that remote working and the collaborative nature of that, and not having to spend half your life trolling up and down the motorway, is a definite improvement.
Thank you, James. Jeff.
Unmute the space bar wasn't working. Yeah, I second what James says, and also with regard to a kind of site-based scenario, I've observed that in most cases sites have reduced the numbers that they have, and I think the lessons we're starting to learn, and Lee's probably seen this, is that people are surprised at how much work can be done by a lot fewer people. And I think that's a key takeaway for me in terms of this COVID effect, and that is to be more efficient actually equals being safer.
Great, thank you. And Lee?
I think my key takeaways are keep integral, look after your supply chain, look after your staff. I think if you can do all those three things, I think everything will be okay.
Thank you, Lee. And David?
Yeah, it's interesting. You know, COVID reminded me and reminds me how everything can flip in a blink of the eye. You know, my 10th of March, I was up in Coventry with a great group of people in the Direct Works Forum, speaking to organisations controlling over 2 million social housing. Terrific organisation. Haven't done anything as a group, but you know, things can flip. The COVID has flipped the sector. It's flipped the world. But let's just think in terms of construction. And you know, competency and all that. It's actually flipped what we're doing, how we're looking at things. You know, we're having to look at occupational health better, safety and things like that. So new normal, we will do it. We'll get through this. There'll be more processes, there'll be more competence, more thought about things. Cohesive, generally looking after your safety of yourself and looking after the safety of others around you. So it's that message, you know, it's that preparedness for eventuality of the unexpected, you know, and that's an accident. So the more prepared you can be, the less likely, and that's the risk metrics, isn't it? Likelihood and probability, the less likelihood of an accident, and the more preparedness and better product and whatever, and better work abilities and things like that, the less severity. That you're not going to stop everything happening, but you're going to lessen it. It's taking that level, you know, the level of where when that flip happens, accidents will happen, but it's getting them to the manageable proportions, and that for me is the challenge as industry gets back. Hopefully 2021, please, let's have a vaccine, let's all get back to work, we can take the masks off and take the tablets and, you know, whatever, and get back. But don't forget that flip that happened, you know, the COVID flip. And we've got to carry that with us. It's a warning. It's a warning to the world, warning to the sector. So that's my takeaway.
Thank you, David. I'd just like to thank everyone that's joined us today and who's been watching all the presentations over the past few days on our system. We do have a poll that's just coming up just to get some feedback. We like to continue to improve our events and make sure we're covering those important topics that everyone wants to hear about. If you go on to the ResiBuild website, you can actually see all of our future events. You can register there as well for both live presentations of CPDs to your team and also recordings of CPDs from Sapphire and other companies as well that are working with us. Alongside that, we do have a link there on for the BSI Introduction to BS 8579, the 2020 Guide to the Design of Balconies and Terraces. That's actually taking part on the 6th of October. So if you are interested in joining that and learning about that, then do go onto the ResBuild website. Like I said, go on to upcoming events and you'll find the link there to register for that. So yes, thanks again everyone for joining us. I hope to see you all at another event in the future. If you do have any interesting facts that you'd like us to cover, then do also feel free to give us an email. All of our contact details, like I say, are on the ResBuild website. So thank you very much, everyone. And again, thanks to the panel for your time, for both the interviews that you've had and for joining us today.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Kelly.
Thank you.